theme of this discussion, and kind of Priyanka set this up a little bit, of like the role of government and what could and should be doing. You know, for example, how she was lobbying to work on policy and and get that alignment. So let's start with that. You know, what is it that people should know about what governments are doing? Like in the UK government, we have the UK trust framework, we have the intermediaries legislation. You don't have to address all of these specifics. Smart data regulations, and then that's happening globally in many jurisdictions around the world. So can you tell us a little bit about what people should know about the role of government and what it is doing, what it should be doing, and how does that work? Ellery, let me start with you.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So I'm Ellery. I'm from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And there are two questions here: there's the should and the should, what should we be doing, what are we doing? And I think that second question starts with kind of, well, how did we come to where we've come to right now? And when we were kind of thinking about what the role of government should be in digital identity, when asked people what they thought the role of government should be in digital identity. So in 2019, we had a call for evidence, and we asked stakeholders right across the industry what we should be doing in this space and what needed to happen in order for a kind of functioning digital identity market. Thank you, Alison. And we heard that there was an important role for government in this space, and that there were kind of three big things that we needed to do. So there was a kind of problem around public trust that was identified, and there was a problem around interoperability, kind of fragmentation of the market. And to solve that, three things. So standards, what does a good digital identity look like? Governance, so how are we going to make sure that people are following those standards? And then legislation, which is the kind of preserve of government, if you will. And so where are we now? What are we doing? Well, to make those three things happen, since 2019, and with loads of stakeholder engagement along the way, including another consultation in the middle, we've published the UK Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework, which I hope many of you in the room already know plenty about. We've got, to make sure that people are following those rules, we've got a certification structure that certifies providers against that, and we've got 40 providers already certified against the UK Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework.
And let me pause you right there, because I think that's a good one. You helped write the trust framework and contribute to it. So can you talk a little bit about that? And let's not assume everyone in the room knows what that is, because we have a global audience too, so they very well may not.
Absolutely, and to be fair, there's quite a few people in this room who helped contribute to writing the trust framework. So I can certainly say that it was a collaborative effort with the industry. So the trust framework it's an interesting document because it's meant to be a way for relying parties, people who consume digital identities, and for users to feel confident that these digital identities that they're using are safe and secure and won't expose them to fraud. And it's a way for relying parties to understand what's been done. How was your identity verified, right? So for some cases, login with Google is good enough. For other cases, you need a verified identity, sort of a scan of a passport, a selfie, a liveness. And there's different levels of identity. And so it's sort of a shorthand for being able to say, I'm presenting this thing to you, bank or supermarket or airlines, and you being able as a relying party to say, can I trust this thing? Does it meet my regulatory requirements? And so before the trust framework existed, you just had to trust that the person coming through the door trying to sell you their product, they said, trust me, it works, it'll be fine. Now you have a way of saying, we have a level playing field on what these different levels of confidence are, and they've been trust marked. So I know as an airline that when this person comes and says, trust me, it works, that I can trust them because they've met all these standards and rules. So that process has been really interesting. And I think that it's in a really good place right now. There's still quite a bit left to do. I'll probably save the rest of my commentary for what should government be doing, but that's where it is now.
Okay, so that kind of sets that. So why don't you keep going with the other pieces of the...
Well, that leads really nicely into that legislation piece. So a really important part in making all of these things happen is underpinning them in legislation. And in terms of what's happening now, I mean, it's really current. The Data Protection and Digital Information Bill is making its way through Parliament at the moment. And that facilitates loads of these things that Alison's just talked about, particularly that trust mark. When we talk about the trust framework, if providers go and get certified against the trust framework, people need to know that they're certified against the trust framework. So you've got a trust mark, you've got a list, a publicly available list of all of those certified providers. The legislation provides for both of those things and ensures that government can kind of do those things to communicate publicly what's gone on with the trust framework. But also there's this third piece that was identified really early on in the work that we did and consulted on about data sharing. So government data sharing with providers that have been certified against the trust framework at users' request. And what that means is that when someone goes and proves their identity, they can go away and then a provider can prove that identity checks against authoritative government data. So yeah, that's that kind of third piece of the story. So you've got all of those standards that Alison has really nicely put what the benefits are there. Governance, and I can talk a little bit more about governance, but in large part that's about making sure those rules are followed, and then legislation, and yeah, really encourage people at this point in time when we've got legislation going through Parliament to really extol the virtues of digital identity, because it's really important right now that we kind of communicate what those are widely to make sure that message gets through both to kind of legislators and more widely.
Okay, and Alison, so go ahead. You were going to comment.
I was just going to jump in and say, because it's easy to forget we have a global audience here, since everyone we're looking at is sitting in London. But the reason we need this really complex set of documents and governance and legislation in the UK is because we don't have a national identity card, right? So another thing government could have done is just issued a national identity card, but they tried that once and it didn't work very well, and nobody's very keen to sort of climb that mountain again. And so in the UK, as most of you will know in here, we use all sorts of things to prove our identities, right? Your driving license, your passport. You can still use a bank card that's got no picture on it at all, but by virtue of the fact that you're holding it, it's seen to be identity that's good enough for some things. Whereas a lot of people who are watching this right now live in countries where the government issues ID. So it's quite straightforward. They've digitized that, and away you go, right? There's no trust framework needed, because everyone assumes that if the government's issued your ID, that's good enough to meet regulation, because in some ways the government's accepting liability in that case. And so the reason the UK has to have this quite convoluted set of different recipes for verifying identity is because we don't have that, and culturally we're not ready or willing to have that.
And help me a little, what's the difference between like a passport and a driver's license and some of this other ID you're referring to?
Well, it goes back to those levels of confidence, right? So there's certain things I would allow you to do if you show me a bank card with your name on it, right? Like I'd probably let you pick up a package at the grocery store that you've ordered for click and collect. I wouldn't let you adopt a child if you showed me a bank card with a name on it, right? That doesn't give me enough confidence that you are who you say you are. So the different ways of verifying identity can give you more or less confidence. So in the physical world, I show you my library card or my Boots card or my bank card with my name on it. That gives you a little bit, enough to pick up a package. If I show you my driving license, that probably gives you a little more confidence. If I show you my passport, right? I've had to do quite a bit to get a passport. I've had to provide multiple forms of identity, and they verified who I am. So that's getting a little bit more intense. And then, at the various highest levels, you'd expect multiple forms of identity, right? A passport, a driving license. This is where, you get asked to bring your council tax bills and your bank statements. Somebody has to look you in the eye. So those are the different levels, and it's really based on people's risk appetite. How sure do they have to be?
Right, so you've been talking a lot about, though, the individual's identity cards, both digital and physical.
Yeah.
The trust frameworks are about the user presenting those to a company and trusting that the company is gonna do the right thing with their data. Is that not correct?
No, it's about both.
Okay.
So it's I as a user can trust it. It's so companies are able to trust the providers who are providing those things. Interestingly, there's nothing in the things in the trust framework about what those companies can then do with the data. Because the companies who are accepting identities don't have to be certified under the trust framework, there's some flow down conditions in it right now, but that's still evolving. And I don't know if you want to talk more about the flow down conditions. Does that make sense? So I present my identity to Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's doesn't have to be certified to use my identity. I can't even present it to Sainsbury's right now, Ian, can I? I present it to my bank. Barclays Bank doesn't need to be certified to accept my identity. So I'm sort of taking it as read that they'll follow the law. The question is, do we need something bigger than that?
And I guess because I think maybe drawing that process, a picture of that process a little bit more is helpful here, so that who is getting certified is the digital identity service providers, and there can be various different kind of types of service there, and there are 40 now certified, and there really is a variety within that landscape. So when you're talking about those flow down conditions, those are about contractual terms that they might have with relying parties that rely upon that. Rely upon their services to prove a user's identity. So there's multiple different players in this. I think when I first started thinking about identity, I think most people don't think about it as being that complicated. If I go and show my passport to someone for a given purpose, I don't think about a relying party, and I don't think about a provider, and I don't think of myself particularly as a user. So all of those things, I think, to speak to what Alison's saying, the providers get certified, and there are flow down conditions that they'll then have in their contracts with relying parties. But relying parties can be any business at all that needs to prove someone's identity, which is why Sainsbury's might be, I'm sure Sainsbury's wouldn't like to go and get certified, but Sainsbury's might be able to, but the corner shop might not, and the corner shop will still be able to kind of will need to prove your identity. So that's to paint a bit more of a picture of who's getting certified and kind of.
So this is pretty complicated stuff. I mean, what are people supposed to do? Or based on what we've learned about the legislation and the policies and the frameworks, where do they start? Where do they go? Can you give us some takeaways and some recommendations as we kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, people in this room.
People in this room.
People in this room and people watching out there. I think people in this room have multiple roles. So people in this room are people who will have to use identities, right? So what should you do? You could go out and proactively get a digital identity right now. There are a few providers who provide them, and you could have a go at trying to use it, right? I've tried to use mine at the Tesco, picking up some packages, and at the Apple store, and my children are horrified that I'm trying to change the world one transaction at a time. But you could go and get one. You will be asked for a digital identity in various circumstances, so we would hope that you would trust it if it's from a certified provider. People in this room are also employers, and you can currently use digital identity for people to prove their right to work or to get their disclosure and borrowing service check, right? So we're hiring someone. Used to take 4 weeks generally, and somebody had to come in and show your receptionist in the building their passport, and they'd take a photocopy and stick it in a drawer somewhere. Now you can do that all digitally, and it takes about 3.5 minutes. And then people in this room run businesses. And I think, it's probably worth you covering that. What do relying parties who run businesses need to be thinking about?
And a relying party is a organization that's being presented an ID.
Right.
Okay.
So if you're a relying party, I think the big thing that we want to end, our end point with this is you should be looking for certified providers, and that's why certification really matters. That we've gone away and put together this really robust set of standards in the UK Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework. People should be able to trust those. So relying parties should look for certified providers. And the thing as well about, which I don't think we've touched on massively, but there is both no mechanism to, and I don't think it's desirable for us to go about mandating digital identities. And that's something that we aren't doing as a government. But what that means is that some of this is use case by use case. So adoption will come from businesses and users seeing the benefits and adopting in those circumstances. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we've done a hell of a lot to make all of the concerns that might surround digital identity less prevalent. And yeah, people in this room have a job to do as well as us in kind of making us take that further along. to speak to what relying parties should do. I mean, hopefully one day, adopt. Like that's the end point. But people need to adopt in circumstances where they feel comfortable, and our job is in facilitating that kind of security.
And we'll learn some of those use cases in the afternoon. Like our last session is going to be doing the age verification, pass certification in store, those types of examples. And the one thing you mentioned too in our preamp call, I mean, one of the benefits to business is credibility, right? So as people start seeing this implementation, they're going to start doing businesses that they can trust. And we learned from this morning, there's a lot of fraud out there, and these signals will be very useful for creating protected and free markets. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay. So just so we can catch ourselves back up on time, like, let's leave with like one question for each of you. Like if as people walk out of this door and they're thinking about what's government's doing and the roles of legislation in these trust frameworks and all that, what should they do? Like when they wake up in the morning and they go to their office, what action would you suggest that everyone take?
I think Ellery can give what government wants you to do. I think it's worthwhile thinking about how people are going to make money off of digital identity, because it's not entirely clear yet how that's going to work. And so I think as the commercial models evolve and we look at the way the money flows, that'll sort of dictate how things evolve as it grows. And I think that's quite a truism. It's quite an obvious thing to say. But everybody accepts that it's useful, but we haven't really seen how the money flows in a scaled sense. And I think some interesting things will come.
And so really that's a call for entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I think there's money
to
be made, but where there is money to be made, there's also things that can be broken. And I think the privacy lobby is most interested on making sure that this is a successful commercial market, because when a market isn't successful commercially, then people are incentivized to do bad things to make money, and that will end up sort of bothering privacy advocates more, right? So I think watching it evolve and seeing where the money flows will be an interesting thing for people to do in all elements of the market.
And actively participating in the evolution of those new business models.
That'd be great if people do.
Yeah, all right, and for you?
And I think to jump on top of this and to speak to a particular interest that I have in the way that we kind of move forward is I think, for people in this room and more generally, I think we need to think more about how we communicate some of these things. I think transparency is really key, and I think commercial models is a really interesting angle on transparency, being transparent about these things. But I think, we have a role and industry has a role in thinking more about what the way that we communicate this, because it's complicated and because, like I say, when I first started thinking about identity and someone told me about relying parties, users, providers, all of these different things, I think we have a complex picture to paint here. And, I think thinking about the way that we make that complex picture palatable and that we communicate the security that we're increasingly building in this space, I think we'll get to a far better place for adoption and to build a kind
And you're
of really
continuing to
robust
look for industry collaboration to help that education
Absolutely.
model forward.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate where we're going. Thank you very good.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.